I'm Peter Larrow, and we're going to spend the next 18 and a half hours, condensed into an hour and a half, talking about some of the basics of Montessori education. This talk called Montessori Education 101 and a half, because I'm assuming you know a little bit about Montessori, where we're at. But first, let me find out how many of you are assistants in a classroom? Anybody? We got a few of you. Okay. Substitute teachers? Okay. Administrators? Nope. Okay. How about former Montessori students? Any of you? No? We're seeing more and more people there. How many of you are in public schools? Okay. And in private schools? We got some, okay, a cross-section of each. How many at the early childhood level? Anyone? Okay, couple. Elementary 1, which is lower elementary, first, second, third grade, okay. Upper elementary, okay, fourth, fifth, sixth. We have anybody at middle school? Oh, in the middle school, okay, all right. How many of you have been in Montessori for 1 month or less? Oh, that's good. Okay. This your first year in Montessori? Okay, we got a couple that are that. Couple years of experience? All right. And more than 3 years experience? Okay, good. So we got a cross-section of what we're going to, our audience that we've got here today. And we want to talk about, if this will go, there we go. Some various things in this talk. We're going to talk a little bit about Maria Montessori herself. Something called the Montessori Triad. Have you heard of that? Anyone? Nope. Okay. Something new? Guess I made that up. No. We're going to talk about the learner, the prepared environment, and the adult. Now, one thing that's important here in this presentation is I'm going to need some audience participation from you. And we got one ground rule that we got to follow. And that ground rule is that we got to have some fun while we're doing this. All right, everybody by that ground rule? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about Dr. Montessori. Maria Montessori, born in Italy, in Ancona, Italy, in 1870. Now, just a little bit of history here, and I happen to be a history major in my pre-Montessori days. 1870 is about the time that Italy became a country. Before that, it was a lot of little city-states. Well, they came together just about the time that Maria was born. So it was a new country, new things coming to be. Maria's education, you know, if we look back at the old European way of doing it, the boys went to school, the girls only went to school to a certain point, and after that, it was their job to stay home. Well, Maria didn't want to stay home. I might say that she's one of our first women's libbers. And so she first started her education to go to a technical school, really looking at being an engineer, learning building roads and bridges and so on, because that was needed in Italy at that time to, again, unify all these city-states. After she did that for a while, she decided she didn't want to go into engineering, decided she wanted to work with people, go into medicine. So she became, after some real struggles of getting into medical school, one of the first women doctors in Italy. A lot of books you might read says that she's the first woman doctor. Some of the later research that's been done in the last few years says, well, she was one of the first 3. So if she was the first or within the first 3, it's still right there at the beginning. Her main focus was on child psychology and anthropology. And so people kind of said, what are we going to do with this Maria, one of these women doctors, what are we going to do to, and if you want to say in some ways, discredit her so that we could get her out of the medical profession, just get it back to men where it should be. There was a group in San Lorenzo, which is one of the little suburbs around Rome, that was setting up a tenement house. And they wanted something to be done with the children at this tenement house while the parents were at work. And so they asked Maria to set up something to do with these children. Through her experiments and so on, she had set up a program called Casa dei Bambini, Children's House. And in that first year, really gained worldwide success for what she was doing with these children. In the early teens, Maria came to the United States, had some real influential people who backed her and brought her to the United States, people such as Alexander Graham Bell, Thomas Edison, and they had her come and speak and talk about this method of education she had that was going to revolutionize education as we know it. Well, one of the first schools to start during this time was in the basement of a very famous house in the United States. Think of a famous house. What's the most famous one you can think of? The White House, there you go. Yep, yep. President Wilson's daughter set up a Montessori school in the basement of the White House at that period. And it was really gaining some great fame in the United States. It was expanding. And then, as I told you, I was a history major. What happened in the United States about the late teens? Does anybody remember? World War I. World War I. And during that time, the United States went into a period of isolationism. Montessori was from a foreign entity, so we've got to eliminate that. At the same time, there was a gentleman who was a student of John Dewey named Kilpatrick, and he wrote this little pamphlet saying about how bad Montessori was. And so those two kind of things together kind of had Montessori really die out. And just like my picture did, I guess. And that didn't, well, what happened here? That didn't take place, or, you know, the Montessori really died out until the late 50s. And in the late 50s, and I'm sure it's probably only Dom and I in the room that might remember this, but there was something that happened that we had to have a change in the education in the United States. Does anybody know what might have happened? I'll give you a little clue and maybe Dom will answer it. Beep, 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 beep. Anybody know? Something called Sputnik. The Russians sent up this satellite, and all of a sudden we had to catch up with the Russians, and so science and every math became very important in our schools, and we looked at Montessori as a way to bring that back. And a lady named Nancy Rambush went to England, took some Montessori training, came back to the United States and started setting up Montessori schools in the United States. She also established at that point the American Montessori Society, and AMS is now the largest Montessori organization in the world. So that brought our renewed interest in Montessori. And what do we have Montessori today? Well, we've got this large organization. We've got Montessori schools, and the last that I've been able to get statistics. Over 6,000 Montessori schools in the United States, over 350 public Montessori schools in the United States, a very fast-growing segment. Used to be in the elementary where it was growing fast, but now the latest area where it's growing by leaps and bounds is in the toddler programs, where parents are really wanting something for their 18-month to 3-year-old child. Okay, so that was a little bit about Maria. She started this an organization in Europe, AMI, Association Montessori International, and she was the president of that for a while. Her son Mario then, and then one of his daughters was president. So it's been kind of a family business for the Montessorians, if you want to say, the Montessoris. Okay, here's to this Montessori triad. Where Montessori is different from the education that most of us grew up with is in most of our education we had the teacher that was the central focus and the disseminator of all the information. Really, in a Montessori classroom, there are 3 things that are very important. There's the learner, or the child, that's in the environment. There's the prepared environment, the whole classroom, the way it's laid out, all the materials, the shelves, the arrangement of the tables and chairs in the classroom is all important. And then there's the adult. So we've got these 3 segments that need to be working with each other and in conjunction with each other. Okay? Now I like to look at adding a little bit more to just the learner, prepared environment, and the adult. I like to say that we've got a learner who's full of potential. And I think in our talk this morning that we had, we saw how we can have some of that potential. But we've got this child who's got this desire to learn, this desire to propel him or herself forward. That's very important. We've got a purposefully prepared environment. It's not just having materials on shelves, but the appropriate materials that are on the shelves. And the materials that are going to draw that child to want to work with them. And then we've got the observing adult. It's that adult who's really watching what's going on that is helping to connect the child with the environment with the child, and all of them being a catalyst through the adult. Okay, so let's look at some of these. Start with, one of Maria's quotes. The child is not like the adult on his way to death. He's on his way to life. We've got to look at that child as really being that potential that's there. Okay, so let's look at kind of this child. What's our goal? To help each child reach his or her fullest potential. Everybody see that in the classrooms you're working with? That we're really trying to help that child with these goals. His social skills, his emotional growth, physical coordination, and then finally this cognitive development that most of our traditional schools are looking at as putting first. What we're saying in Montessori is we've got to help that whole child. We've got to develop all of these other areas before we can really get to that cognitive and make that as successful as we want it to be. All right. Something called planes of development. And in the planes of development, what Maria told us is that children go through different stages, different abilities, their planes of development at different stages, different times. Not all child is going to be at the same developmental stage at the same time. And that each of these levels, there's different important parts of them, and we're going to cover some of those in just a minute. That each of these is kind of a rebirth. And as the child goes from one stage to another, there's other things that pull that child in, that grab that child, that make that child want to participate in the program. Okay, so let's look at that early childhood learner, and we've got a couple of you in the EC classroom. And this stage of development is usually considered this birth through about age 6. Now, we can't just say that at age 6 it stops, because with some children they may move into the next plane of development at 5. Some may not move into that next plane of development till they're 8. But typically it's about age 6. It's a time of dramatic growth and transformation. Just think of that child from birth to age 6, how much they've grown, how much they've developed. Their body is so much larger, they're much stronger. The desire is really to work towards independence. Okay? That's where the child is finding their interest. Concrete objects, such as you see the girl here with the cylinder block. These concrete objects are the building blocks that are going to help for later abstract thinking. So they're doing a lot with their hands. They're learning through all of their senses, and we believe that the more senses we can involve in a learning process, the more rapidly and completely we're going to learn something. This child has something we call the absorbent mind, that they take in everything around them. Some people compare it to like a sponge soaking up water, just soaks everything in. Their main question that they're asking, what is it? What is it? When you think of the young children you're around, they're always saying, what? 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 And their desire, let me do it by myself. And you know, any of you who've been around toddlers, you know, you're going to hear them say, me do it, me do it. They want to do it by themselves. So a lot of the activities that we have at the early childhood level, especially if we look at practical life section of the classroom, are to help that child develop skills so he or she can take care of themselves. Okay. Let's go on to childhood, that 6 to 12-year-old, or the elementary age child. Okay. Here we have an emphasis on intellectual growth. Early childhood was physical, now we've got intellectual growth. Their reasoning to seek to acquire information. They want to do a lot of research. And in a Montessori classroom, one of the goals of the teacher, the assistants, is to help guide that child as to where they can get answers to their questions. Not to answer the question, but help the child answer them for themselves. We have something called the mathematical mind. Doesn't mean that they like arithmetic. But mathematical mind, being back again to the time of Maria, I might want to compare it. Back then we didn't teach arithmetic in schools. Do you know what the subject was called back then? Logic. Logic. So think of this mathematical mind as kind of that logical mind that puts things in order. That's a real reason for using a lot of timelines in the elementary classrooms so that they can order things. They move from concrete to more abstract thinking, and they're guided by the materials that are in the classroom to do that exact process. Imagination is a big part of the Montessori elementary classroom. And it's striking that child's imagination, their curiosity, their desire to, I want to do this, that sparks them into that research and goes into that logical thinking. The elementary child's always asking, why? Why? They're looking for those answers. And their desire is really to know things. They want to know as much as they can. All right, let's go into the next plane of development that she talked about, adolescence. And adolescence is that time from 12 to 18 years. So it's your middle school and your high school years. Emphasis is on social and economic growth. A lot of middle schools and high schools have a business that the children run so that they can learn about the economy. There's an emphasis on independence and interdependence. So how can I be independent but also dependent with others? They have a reasoning mind. It's a mind where they can take all this information and start really putting it together and coming up with some other ideas from that. Abstract reasoning and emotional development is a strong part of this. You know, we always talk about the struggles that adolescents are going through, trying to figure out where they're fitting in. And that's their question. How can I fit in? How can I fit in? And their desire is to do it with others, but also let me be myself. I want to do it with you, but I want to do it my way. Okay, and you know, that's why we have the situations you see where you know, we all wear clothing that is different, but we all wear it the same way, you know, kind of thing. All right, and then one more age that Montessori had on her planes of development was maturity. And this is 18 to 24 years, and she really didn't have time in her life to spend a lot of time working on this. But just a few ideas she gave us. The emphasis is on great potential and possibilities. So at this age, we're looking at what can happen, what can there be. It's to discover one's mission. Why am I here? Okay. The socially conscious. We're going out and we're going to conquer the world. That culture and education have no bounds. I can learn as much as I want to learn. Back to that question, why am I here? Is what they're trying to figure out. And how far can I go? Okay. Now, Montessori said that all humans have some basic tendencies that they go through, and we want to go through these very quickly. Exploration. Idea of what that might be about from anyone? Okay. What it is they want to find out as much as they can, we as humans, I should say, as much as we can about ourselves, our community, the classroom that they might be in, Next one is orientation. And here I'm not talking about the orientation that some of you might do with a compass and you're out in the woods trying to figure going from one place to another, but it's really knowing where you're at in the environment, where things are in the environment, and that's important for children. The early childhood student, inside the classroom, that's their comfort zone. That's where they really feel comfortable, and why many Montessori programs don't take a lot of field trips with preschool students, because they feel comfortable inside the walls of their classroom. The boundaries have been established there. In elementary, when they're trying to be a little more social, they still need that comfort of the classroom, knowing that things are in certain places, but they want to go out a little bit more. They want to explore some of their community. Order. Order is very important human tendency. We start at the early childhood level and everything has its place. We have work mats that the children can work on. When they're done, it goes back on a shelf. And in the elementary, the same kind of thing should carry on. That there's a place for everything because we know where it is, and that helps us build a community when everyone knows where things go. Communication. Learning language, very important for the early childhood student, the elementary student, learning how to, the structure of sentences and building things so that they really can communicate with others. Repetition. Can't stress this one enough. In our traditional school, we tend to, today we're going to cover page 14 in the book, and tomorrow we're going to be on page 15. The next day we're going to be on page 16. And in Montessori, what we're looking at is the child starts to do a project, and they can do that project, that activity, as long as they want to, so that they gain the knowledge from it. They may do that one activity over and over and over again to see if they really do have that knowledge. Maria talks in one of her books, and if you remember back to one of those first slides, the girl with the cylinder block, that cylinder where it had the 10 little, or the block that had the 10 little cylinders in it. Well, Maria talks about a child that was so focused and concentrating on that activity that she brought in some men to pick up the child's table and chair and carry it across the room to see if the child was still concentrating on it, and really accomplished that task. And I thought, okay, that sounds like a good story. I don't know if that could really happen. A few years ago, I had a child who was concentrating on that very same activity. And I had watched her do it about 12 times. And I thought, okay, how much longer is she going to do this? And then that thing that I read in Maria's book came to mind. Well, I didn't have people I could bring in to carry the child across the room. But what I did with my assistant was we took all the rest of the children out of the classroom very quietly, and we stood at the door. And you know, it was another 15 minutes before she realized that everyone was gone. It was that getting, you know, lost in your work, but it was meeting a need that she had for a skill of, in this case, grading cylinders from largest to smallest. So it's doing things over and over and over again that helps the learning process. And we're going to come back to this idea and talk about it a little bit later. exactness, that everything has a place and everything has a way to do it. And it's by knowing that exactness that we can then allow creativity. Activity, movement. One of the things that's important in a Montessori classroom is movement. I'm not talking running from one side of the classroom to another, or even walking quickly, but the manipulation of things with their hands. And I like to say that the brain is handmade. That what we're doing with our hands, getting all those senses involved, is what is putting information in the child's brain. Okay. And that comes to manipulation again. Getting them totally engrossed and involved in what's happening. Okay. Work. It's work that is play to the child. Here it's by work, what we want to say is the child feels like they've accomplished something. And all of us feel good when we've accomplished something. And for the child, what may look like play to us is very serious work to them. Okay. Abstraction and creativity. Okay. That they can take abstract ideas and then become creative with them is what we're getting the child to. And what's this leading to is self-perfection. I feel good about myself and what I can do. Now, this morning we heard about something called teachable moments. And Montessori also called them sensitive periods. And a sensitive period is the period when a child is really highly motivated to learn something. It's the easiest time in their life to really learn a specific skill or so on. And I know it's kind of hard to see, but if we look at the purple line that's up here from 0 and it goes to about 5 years and 3 months, that's a sensitive period for language. That's when it's the easiest time for a child to capture language, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4, however many languages the child hears at this time and incorporates into their being. That's an easy time for the child to learn language. If we notice the time in the gold one, it goes from about 1 year, 4 months to 2 years, 3 months. Again, it's going to vary with the children. But that's for small objects. And if any of you have had the chance to go out for a walk with a toddler, you'll notice they'll stop and they'll look at all the little ants that are on the sidewalk and so on, because those small objects draw the attention of the child. So as an adult in the classroom who's trying to connect the child with the environment, we've got to be able to observe, going back to that observing adult, what sensitive period they're in. And there are sensitive periods for elementary age children also. I just happen to have a chart here for the EC, and that's only some of them. But our role really as the adult is to connect that child with the appropriate activities. Okay. You just take a couple minutes, and it's only going to be a couple minutes. Think about one idea that you've gained about the learner so far today. Just one idea that you've gained about the learner. And then how is knowing this information going to help you in your job? Okay. Let's go on then. You have some time later to write down some more things. And look at this purposefully prepared environment. And Maria said it is through the environment that the individual is molded and brought to perfection. Since the child is formed by his environment, he has need of precise and determined guides and not simply some vague constructive formula. So it has to be prepared that the child knows where those boundaries are. Children learn by exploring and observing. 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 It's one of those great gifts that we give children in Montessori, is to learn how to observe. They learn from the whole environment, the room, the materials, the social climate. They've got to be carefully designed to really spark that child's desire to learn. Order and beauty has to be there, whether it is an early childhood environment, an infant and toddler environment, or an adolescent environment. There's still an order and beauty that's important. And there I want to say, under order and beauty, less is more. It's not always having so many things crammed onto a shelf that's important. The important thing is having the materials there that call to that child to say, come and see me. You know, it used to be back in schools, we had a course called journalism. And there they talked about the importance of white space. The white space is a point where you reach and it gives your eye a chance to focus and relax. We need to have white space on our shelves, a space where there is nothing there. So it helps the child to focus on what's on that one little tray. Okay. The accessibility of the materials. They need to be where the child can get them when the child's interested in doing that work. Our job as an adult in the classroom should be to work ourselves out of a job. That Maria says, the children are working as if I weren't even here. Well, our success in preparing the environment is how well we've done to set it up so that the children can be successful by themselves. Things move from easy to more difficult on the shelf structure. We have one of every activity. Now I realize that in some of our elementary programs we may have a couple stamp games or we may have a couple movable alphabets. But for most things we only have one of those activities, because having that one helps build community. It helps eliminate competition. It helps the children to learn to develop some patience. And I always say to, our people in training, how many pink towers do we have in a classroom? It's that little tower of 10 different cubes and so on. And they'll tell me one. And, how many brown stairs do we have? One. How many sets of crayons or markers do we have out? We should have one. Because otherwise, what we're doing is setting up our environment. Are we setting it up for learning? Are we setting it up for socialization? Are we setting it up for competition? All things that we've got to look at in preparing our environment. The environment needs to be there to help the child learn to make choices for themselves. Besides observation, that second great gift that we can give children is the ability to make choices, to learn how to make appropriate choices. It's not always someone telling them what to do. It's to help develop independence, which is that foundation for freedom and self-discipline. I believe in myself. I can do it. Okay? So preparing this environment is really a big job to look at the materials that we have. You know, and these materials, they need to be beautiful. They need to be in good repair. They isolate some difficulty. That the child is learning one concept, and we want to make sure that the materials are teaching one concept clearly, and then letting the child explore from them. That they're self-corrective. That the adult doesn't always have to be the one looking at all the work and correcting it. With the pink tower, which we can see up here, the child can very readily see if they have them built in order or if they're out of order. Should be multisensory. Again, going back to that idea, the more senses that we can involve in the learning process, the more rapidly and completely we're going to learn something. And going from concrete to abstract. Instead of in math saying to the child, if we have 3 apples plus 2 apples, how many apples do we have? Well, let's have 3 apples there for them that they can count and manipulate, that movement that's important. And the 2 apples, that they can put them together and find out that they do have 5 apples. Okay. All right. The hand is the instrument of the brain. Manipulating it with our hands is help putting that information into our mind. Mind and movement are 2 parts of a single cycle, and movement is the superior expression. I know we were all sitting here and just listening, and our brains are probably getting a little tired right now because we're not actively engaged in the process. The more that we can get the child actively engaged, the more they're going to learn because they want to do it. All right, ground rules. We all have some ground rules in our environments. And what do those ground rules do? Well, they promote self-control, responsibility for the self, cooperation with others, and welfare of the community. Almost sounds like some of those values that we were talking about, or virtues. When behavior occurs that threatens the safety of people or property, immediate adult intervention is necessary. But there's some questions that we need to ask before we intervene. Is the behavior dangerous to the student or others? Is it destructive to the environment or the materials? And is it disturbing the activity of others? So before we really step in, be asking ourselves those questions. Is it dangerous to the student? Is it destructive to the environment? And is it disturbing others? Because in Montessori we have freedom, but it's freedom within limits. And where does your limit end? Where mine begins. So it's back to this, is it disturbing the activities of others? Okay, and in Montessori we have a typical 3-year age groupings. Toddler, which is a little bit of an exception here, being 18 months to 3 years. There are some Montessori schools that I know of, though, that they have their infant and toddler program combined. So it goes from birth through age 3. Early childhood, which is usually 3 through kindergarten. Elementary 1, 6 to 9-year-olds. Elementary 2, 9 to 12-year-olds, or equivalent 4th through 6th grade. Middle school, 12 to 15-year-olds, and high school, 15 to 18-year-olds. And there are some exceptions that happen in that. But having this mixed age grouping is what's helping children to develop a community. Think about our normal child that we might have. If you've got a child who is 8 years old and is celebrating their, I should say, celebrating their 8th birthday, do you only invite 8-year-olds to their birthday party? No, we invite all their cousins and friends and so on. That's a mixed age grouping because things happen well in a mixed age grouping. And what we found is that in Montessori they actually happen better with a 3-year age grouping because the older student acts as that role model for the younger students. And the younger students that they're really acting the most as the role model for are the first-year students in the classroom. So it's the youngest age group. It's like if there's only 2 age groups together, sometimes it becomes like that sibling rivalry at home where you got siblings that are too close together, that they're always competing and arguing with each other. Where if you've got a 3-year age span, there seems to be a much better flow in the classroom. And so that's part of preparing the environment also. And then we've got the curriculum. Okay. And it's really an integrated one, and I know that chart might be a little hard to see. But if we look at it as a spiral curriculum where what we've taught in early childhood, we're going to cover those same kind of subjects a little more in depth at the child's ability as they go through the elementary years, as they go into middle school and into high school also. Each of them developmentally set up for the children, the age group that we're with. And that's why that planes of development that we covered is important to know what those planes of development are. All right, time for you to do a little work here again. What struck you about this prepared environment? Something that you hadn't thought about before. And then how can you use this information in your job to maybe help the children in their development? One of the important things, even with children, is giving them time to reflect on what they're doing. And we like to, with our elementary age students especially, at the end of a project that they do, when they're recording their work in their work journal or so on, it's not complete until they write a sentence about something they learned from doing this activity. And what does that do? That takes the burden of learning off the teacher from teaching to put it onto the student to what they should be learning. So it's really making the student responsible for their own education. And after all, we're the only ones that can teach ourselves anything. So having time for them to reflect is important. All right. Let's move on then to the one that we're probably most familiar with is the adult. Okay. And the adult in the Montessori classroom has to be the guide on the side, not the sage on the stage. We're not that person that has all the answers, the person that has all the information. It's the adult's role to direct, stimulate, and guide the learner through the learning process, the process of teaching him or herself. And it's a big job. It's a big job because we've got 20, 25, 30 children in our classroom, each of them being at a different stage of development, each with different ideas and different thoughts that they've got going on. So let's look at some of these rules about how we can be that guide on the side. We've got to be that creator and caretaker of the environment. That person who's really looked at the children, looked at the materials that are on the shelf, have been able to walk up to that tray that has 2 inches of dust on it, blow the dust off and say, I don't think anybody's used this for a while. Maybe it doesn't belong in the environment. Okay. So to be able to take some of those things off the shelf, to give that white space. An exemplar or a role model. In other words, our actions speak louder than words. We've got to think about what is appropriate in the classroom. What is appropriate for the students to be doing, and then we've got to role model that. You know, we've got a picture here of someone blowing his or her nose, and you know, at the early childhood level, that's a big task to help children learn how to blow their nose and to go over and wash their hands afterwards. That we need to be calm and kind, controlled, and have considerate attitudes and behavior that have positive results. We've got to be thinking about everything that we do in the room, and I know it's easy for us as adults. Gee, there's these nice low tables, but they're a little bit higher than the chair that we can plop ourselves down on that table, and it's more comfortable to talk to a child. But what are we also doing? We're giving the child permission to sit on tables. And is that what we want to do? Or if we go over and plop ourselves on a shelf, is that really appropriate action for us? Everything we do in the classroom has to be role modeling for the children. Someone told us earlier about having all of our work on a rug. If we're giving a presentation, all of our work needs to be on a rug. And if our ground rule says that we walk around rugs, we as the adult need to do that also instead of stepping over them. Okay? Child is watching you because you're their role model. Okay. All right, let's go on to another one. One of my favorite ones. The ones that I think we as the adults in the classroom probably don't do enough of because it's a unfamiliar role for us to see teachers in, because not many of us can remember times when a teacher in a traditional classroom really sat and observed us, unless we were taking a test. And then they were observing to make sure that we weren't hiding answers somewhere, okay? But this is an important job for us also, observing and record keeping, so that we can support each child's development. Everyone in the environment needs to be familiar with the observation and record-keeping techniques that you've got in your environment. We're going to spend a little bit of time right now doing some observation activities, because I think it's one of the most important jobs we have as an adult, but one that we don't really have a lot of practice in. So let's see if we can find differences here. Well, let me ask you a question, and I want everyone to be real honest. How many of you counted up and when you reached 6, you stopped? Okay, all right. And I purposely did this, and I knew there were more than 6, but sometimes we as the adults set limits for children. oh, you're complete when you get this much done. You know, we as the adults, our job is to set the minimum. It's the child's job to set the maximum. How much can they do? So we want to set the minimum. But yeah, there were more than 6 up here. But we want to really be looking at what all are we seeing? What are we observing? So let's go on to another one and see what differences we can find in this one. Starting to really see what's some differences that we've got, and we've got to really be looking for differences, focused and concentrating on differences. So let's see how well you're doing with that.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away.
Sorry, madam.
It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you?
Action.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
Okay. How many of you saw those changes the first time through? And we'll have to see what we can do to figure out the sound here also. This was actually a video put out by the mayor of London, England, who was an avid bike rider, to try and get people to really look and see bicyclists on the road. But there are a lot of different changes that happened in here. What I'm going to ask for you to do is just kind of write down some of what you thought about while we see if we can figure out what's going on with the sound, and then we'll play it again.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away.
Sorry, madam.
It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you?
Action.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
Everybody get the 21 changes that time through? No. Okay. There's a lot of changes that happen and a lot of things for us to really be watching in a classroom to see what's going on. I've got another little video I want you to look at now. And in this one, to help you focus again a little bit, is watch the concentration that this girl is going to display while she's building the pink tower. And we want to talk a little bit about that once this is over. What would give you an idea that she was really concentrating on this work? What in her movements and her motions? Anyone? Yes?
She was setting them up there, like she's getting them exactly.
Okay, getting them exactly there and really precisely positioning each cube. Okay, what else?
When she tried to get one of the cubes, she tried to move one side, so she got it. She moved around to find the right side for what she needs next.
Right. Okay. She was concentrating and focused. She knew the task. This definitely wasn't the first time she had done this. But if you noticed at the beginning, she picked up a cube and she put another one on, and then she was going to get another one and kind of shook her head and walked around to get that larger cube that she could put up there. And a couple times in here she was looking to see what the next cube would be to make sure she was self-correcting as she went along. And that's one of the important things for these materials, that they are self-corrective. Okay, so let's look then at observation. Why do we observe children as the adult in the room? To discover their interest, to watch how they problem solve, and you could see that girl and her problem solving in that last video. And to gain an understanding of their developmental level, to know what skills the children need and continue to practice, and to learn about their personalities. Okay, all of the things that we should be trying to discover about the children, keeping notes about them so that we can look at these children. Okay. And then when we observe materials, for example, if we're just watching one material, how it moves from one child to another, how many repetitions by a child, how many times does that child do it over and over again? What variations or extensions, ways that we didn't show them, have they come up with on their own? How long does it remain out in use, and how does we use this to meet the state standards? You know, how's the child using this material? Or how can we structure it so it meets those standards? Okay, one more video for you to look at real quickly. And on this one, I want you to watch the number of repetitions that happen.
Say good morning, Ichao. Say hello. Nathaniel, say hello.
It goes on and on and on, and you see, just keep repeating and repeating. But watch now what's happening with the adult interaction with it. This is coming in.
Who's coming? Who's coming? Yes, that's right, Teresa. Okay, it's circle time. Can we keep the materials? Keep the materials, okay? Come on, sponge your tray.
Yes, keep.
Say bye-bye, Nathaniel. Nathaniel, bye-bye. Say bye-bye.
Very good. Go sit on the mat.
Repeats and repeats and repeats. But we have to be careful as the adults not to interfere with the child's concentration. If you noticed a couple times in there, one time he had a real large spill, it was because the adult told him to say hi to somebody in the classroom. So she interrupted his concentration. And this was a toddler. One of those children in that 18-month to 3-year-old age grouping. So movement is important. He knew what to do when he spilled. He would clean up with the sponge a little bit. But children repeating, it's not just doing something once and think that they have that skill. Okay. Another role of the adult is the one that most of us are used to, the instructor. And with the instructor, many times what we're doing is giving something known as a 3-period lesson. Has anyone heard of 3-period lesson? Okay. A 3-period lesson would be the first period, direct instruction. This is a remote. Okay? This is a remote. And then I could say, this is a speaker. So we have a remote and we have a speaker. It's direct instruction, giving that terminology to the children. The second period is practice, where I could say, point to the speaker, point to the remote, put the remote on your shoulder. It's practice for the child of knowing which of these things is happening. And that's where the real learning takes place. It's not in that first period direct instruction. It's in the child's practice that it takes place. And then the third period is evaluation. And I know there's a rumor out there that we don't do any testing in Montessori. We're always testing. We're always evaluating and knowing what skills the child has developed and where we're moving them forward. And in this third period, I say, what is this? It's a remote. And what is this? They're going to give me the terminology back. It's a speaker. Okay. I've got just a quick video, and I think we may go through this one quickly on the 3-period lesson. We'll see if we can hear it.
This is 1 unit. What is this?
1 unit.
This is 110.
110.
This is 100.
100.
This is 1,000.
1,000.
Can you please show me 100? Can you please show me 1,000? Can you please show me 110? Can you please show me 1 unit? What is this?
100.
What is this?
1 unit.
What is this?
110.
What is this?
100.
What is this?
1,000.
Good.
Okay, so that was an evaluation stage that they were in last, and the girl missed the difference between the 1,000 and the 100. So it gives you information about, okay, I need to go back over and do this skill with her another day, another time. Okay, so what are some other roles? Well, we've got that motivator, that one who's encouraging the child to learn new concepts, new skills. We've got the supporter. Remember, we're here trying to develop that whole child, not just the academic part. The protector and respecter. That is an important role of the adult, and also that manager of disruptive, dangerous, and destructive behaviors. We've got a lot of roles as the adult that are very important for us to consider in the classroom. For resource teachers, things to consider is the coordination of the curriculum. to be talking with the classroom teachers. What are you covering? So that, gee, maybe you're covering early American history in your lower elementary classroom. How about in music class, we teach some songs from that time period. And in phys ed, we teach some games that are happening in that time period. So it's not just isolated things, but it's, again, that curriculum that comes together. And it takes that coordination with the special teachers, the resource teachers, to make that happen. That we always try and show the whole and then break it down into its parts. Is one of the skills that we use in Montessori. Instead of taking individual parts and helping the child build them into the whole, we begin with the whole, we break it down to the parts, and then we build it back to the whole again. So they've had the visual of what it was, where we're going. Isolation and difficulty. Just teaching one skill at a time. Letting them practice that skill and then moving on to something else, rather than having a lesson include 3 or 4 new concepts. Make it a short lesson with one concept. And then individualizing follow-up work. Not everyone has to do the same follow-up work. Howard Gardner talks about the different abilities that we have. And how can we help each child in their skill set to learn this concept? Okay, so then let's come back to putting it all together as what we started with. Montessori is more than beautiful materials organized on shelves. It's more than an adult and a child. It's all of the elements working together to support each other. Okay, it's that Montessori triad. Remember those arrows that were going around, showing the different parts that all have to work together. Okay. All right, so I want to thank you for the work you're doing with children, supporting children in their development. Make each day a special day for each child that comes into your classroom. Thank you.